I think some of you know me, but for those who don't, I've given many, many hundreds of presentations to live groups like this, local radio, national TV, international TV. I've spoken about the science behind living longer, perhaps living for an unlimited period of time. But what I'm going to be presenting tonight in this one 45 to 50-minute presentation may have more new discoveries as to how we may be able to achieve indefinitely extended healthy lifespans than any other presentation I've ever given. And it's not me doing this. This is the science moving forward in a way that radically extended human lifespans are just around the corner. We just have to stay alive to make that happen. And what has transpired over the last month or two with our scientists evaluating all of these different research projects is a method to extend lifespan in mice by 25%. Now, I presented this back 18 months ago in this church, and I showed film of those mice. I'm going to show that again. But what's so fantastic about that study done in 2024 when it was published is it's now transitioned into humans. Humans are now getting an interleukin-11 inhibitor, which, as you're going to see, confers tremendous longevity benefits. And if that was all I was going to talk about tonight, it would be fantastic. But there's also a new way to perhaps provide you with limitless numbers of telomeres. A lot of us are taking telomere extending nutrients. They may work a little bit. They don't get us back to where we want to go. This new technology in which they can transplant literally rivers of youthful telomeres systemically in your body may be the solution to the telomere shortening that one way or another is going to kill us if we don't do something to reverse us. But we're also going to be talking about new transcription factors beyond the OSK Yamanaka factors that our group are studying right now that are also reversing hallmarks of aging. This is brand new research, and I'm going to be talking about that tonight in addition to everything else. And FDA approved repurposed drugs. They're demonstrating efficacies maybe beyond what we originally anticipated. We know about metformin, rapamycin, we know about senolytics, but there's even more drugs out there that AI is bringing together in a way to enable us to identify what we can do right now to potentially add many healthy years to our lifespan. And the world's first autonomous, programmable mini computer smaller than a grain of sand that can circulate through your body theoretically and repair any cellular or molecular damage that you're encountering. That's been uncovered just over the last 35 days. And Elon Musk, he was asked a question during the interview, high-level interview at the World Economic Summit, is aging a solvable problem? And he thought it was. He said it may even be reversible. So we have a live interview tape of him discussing that. And most important right now, for the immediate term, is what can you do right now to not die, to not fall victim to the degenerative illnesses that we're all unfortunately vulnerable to as we grow biologically younger. And what I'm going to be doing, just to keep everyone on track so they can separate all these new discoveries, is I'm going to define something that's so spectacular that it may change the entire universe as it relates to human longevity. So I'm going to call that a Kitty Hawk moment. In 1903, there was one. They flew a heavier-than aircraft up off the ground, and that changed the way people travel forever. And the big announcement is the Calico Lab. Now, that was set up by Google around 2013. They put a lot of money into it, and the idea was to identify methods to slow and reverse biological aging. And there's been a lot of criticism of Calico by virtue of, well, where is the results? What are you doing to achieve that milestone that you set for yourself? And the good news is they funded some research. They extended lifespan in mice 25%, which is not necessarily a big announcement, a big deal. There's a number of ways to extend mouse lifespan 25%. But what's spectacular is that's moved into human clinical testing within 18 months. There's something that was proven in the laboratory. I'm going to show you the proof in the laboratory next. But the fact that they moved this into human study is unprecedented. A lot of this has to do with AI breaking down the barriers that delay research, the kind of research we need to save our lives. So I want everyone to clearly understand a toxic cytokine in our bodies called interleukin 11, or IL-11. Unfortunately, this is something we'd rather not have in our bodies. It's probably an evolutionary relic of some sort, but we don't want it in our bodies because it causes brain damage, heart muscle damage, fibrosis. It is something that unfortunately kills us, and we want to do something to neutralize this. We don't want to have it in our body. And what they've found in study after study is when they block the interleukin 11, and there's two ways to do it. When you block the activity of it, well, you reduce inflammation, you help protect your heart, you reduce fibrosis, which is a horrible condition most of us undergo if we live long enough. We protect our organs if we can just inhibit the interleukin 11 cytokine. And just so everyone understands, fibrosis, something that's not clearly understood. You've probably heard of pulmonary fibrosis, where the lungs become so hardened with connective tissue they no longer function and you suffocate. There's also hepatic fibrosis, which moves on to cirrhosis of the liver, for kills people. There's cardiac fibrosis, in which your heart muscle, unfortunately, becomes loaded with connective tissue. We want to impede fibrosis in our bodies as we age, and that's what interleukin 11 inhibition does. So I talked about in this church about 18 months ago, this study came out, fantastic. They extended lifespan in these mice 25%. And you can see the picture, the mouse on the left is normal aged. And like a normal aged person, it's losing its hair, it's losing its coat color, it's frail, it's not the same. The one on the right had its interleukin 11 inhibited, and it's behaving like a younger mouse, and it lives a lot longer than the control group. So we want to inhibit interleukin 11 to live longer and look better. This is these kind of benefits seem to go hand in hand. So what happens when you inhibit interleukin 11? Well, you extend lifespan. And how do you do that? Well, you suppress excess inflammation and fibrosis. And IL-11, unfortunately, increases as we grow older, as do fibrotic diseases, as does inflammation. So inhibiting IL-11 can inhibit inflammation and fibrosis, and it extends lifespan in male and female mice. Important, by the way, some of the research I talk about has only been done in male or female animals. We don't really know if it works across that borderline, and we want to make sure that we do understand that. And this is effective. If we inhibit IL-11, it's effective in young and older animals. Very, very important. And here's what's most significant. This was only a 10-month study, and they were looking at the survival curves, and the interleukin 11 inhibited mice, they lived 40 to 50%. At 10 months out, the treated mice were still alive by 40 to 50% of them, and the controls, only 10% were still alive. And what we regret is they terminated the study at 10 months. We don't know how much longer these IL-11 inhibited mice may have lived. It may have resulted in some maximum lifespan. So again, when we looked at normal aged mice without IL-11 inhibition therapy, they're frail, they're dying, they look old, they move around slower. They're just not the same as younger mice, the same that older humans are not the same as younger humans. And when you alter the gene at birth of these mice so they cannot make interleukin 11, well, they remain alive longer, they remain alive, healthy aging longer, and they look better. And what's so important about this is, some people might think, isn't interleukin 11 needed for something? Well, they just proved, at least in mice, it's not needed at all. You can knock it out, the gene that makes IL-11, and the mice live longer, their health spans are improved, everything improves when you knock out this toxic cytokine. So what does IL-11 inhibition accomplish? Well, it's one of the reasons people take metformin and rapamycin and engage in intermittent fasting. It inhibits excess mTOR-C1. That's the mechanistic target of rapamycin. That's something in most people, it's revving up our cells too fast, creating accelerated aging. We want to slow down excess mTOR-C1, and when you inhibit IL-11, you slow down mTOR-C1, you increase AMPK activity. That's why a lot of you are taking metformin and other types of ways to boost AMPK. Exercise is a good way of doing it. Well, IL-11 inhibition, it accomplishes that, and it reduces markers of senescence. We all accumulate senescent cells with aging. Inhibit IL-11, there's less senescence. Decrease liver fibrosis, upregulate brown adipose tissue. And when you do that, you then reduce fat mass, reduce lipids, and, well, you improve insulin sensitivity, a concern for anyone who's pre-diabetic or predisposed to diabetes. You want to improve insulin sensitivity so your cells work better. You get these 7 specific benefits when IL-11 is inhibited. And when that drug becomes available for treating, let's say, pulmonary fibrosis, a lot of us in this church are going to get our hands on that drug and use it in a way to prevent the damage that IL-11 inflicts in our body. So just to review again, the 2 methods that were used to knock out the IL-11 toxicity in the body. And the one was using a gene therapy to knock it out completely from birth. And again, this is important. It extended lifespan when you no longer had interleukin-11 in these mice. Now, the way we're going to have to do it, because we're older, we don't really have the ability to knock out that IL-11 gene safely yet, is simply an anti-IL-11 antibody. We'll shoot that up a couple times a year, neutralize the impact of IL-11 in our body, and when they did that to older mice, they lived 23% longer. So we've got now a mechanism to knock out IL-11 in people once this goes through the clinical trials. This is a spectacular development. And I want to emphasize again, the degree of maximum lifespan when it comes to inhibiting IL-11, it's huge. 40 to 50% of those treated mice were alive. 10 months into this study, only 10% of the controls. Those mice may have lived much, much longer, and we're going to pursue every bit of research we're able to see how much longer mice given IL-11 antibodies are able to live. It could wind up enabling people to live way beyond current lifespans. Now, I'd like to put these charts up for people to study. I know sometimes they're hard to understand when you're sitting here in a room and those charts are not that big, but every one of those charts has a black line to the left. Those are normal aged mice who are dying, dropping off, just like people. As they grow older, they start to die. And on the right are the IL-11 inhibited mice. This is using the IL-11 neutralizing antibody. They're all living longer. And that chart to the upper left-hand corner, that one is really fascinating because it looks like they plateaued. They stopped dying for a while, and we wish that study, again, continued beyond the 10 months. But every single one of these measurements, in males, females, mixed sexes, every way they could measure showed you inhibit IL-11, in this case using an antibody to neutralize the impact of it, you get to live a lot longer and you live a lot healthier. So again, a side-by-side comparison. You can either be a person who normally ages and you will look older, you'll feel older, and you'll die sooner, or you can have your IL-11 inhibited and perhaps derive the same benefits you're seeing side-by-side in this video. It's very impressive, this anti-aging mechanism that, again, is now in clinical trials. But I want to go on the opposite direction now for anyone who thinks maybe there is some benefit to interleukin-11 in humans. And at one point, they mistakenly thought there was. They thought it might be good for treating chemotherapy patients who had their bone marrow impeded and they needed to make more platelets. So they were using IL-11 activators to produce more platelets, and that was unfortunately creating a lot of side effects. They thought it might be effective in sepsis management, which I don't know why, because IL-11 produces more inflammatory signals. In sepsis, people often die of hyperinflammation. But nonetheless, this is what early stage scientists thought IL-11 might do. And they even had a drug given to cancer patients called Nurmega. And this was able to activate interleukin-11 to produce more platelets, which these cancer patients needed because they were inundated with chemotherapy. But this drug, it was approved, it was used, and it failed. And it's been recognized as being a failure because it's no longer being made. It was attempted to be used in cancer patients and sepsis patients, and the side effects, fluid retention, atrial fibrillation, heart failure. It's not good. And the reason I'm showing you this is if people think maybe there's a benefit to boosting IL-11 activity, we can show them, no, they already tried it. They had good intentions, but it failed. Boosting IL-11 was killing people. The drug isn't even made anymore in North America. I doubt it's used anywhere else in the world. There are better drugs to boost platelet function in chemotherapy patients. So we know that this has been tested in both ways. Inhibited in mice, they live a lot longer, they do great. And if you activate it in people, you kill them sooner. It really is a terrible situation. So interleukin-11 is a target for us to impede, impair, knock out completely. And it worked in both sexes. Very important. It improved health span, not just lifespan. The animals were healthier throughout their life in response to this. And again, it worked, started in later life, very important. And the fantastic news is it's transitioned from just 18 months ago, we were showing mice benefiting. It's now in human study. This could be available within the next year or two. When it is available, you can believe we will let the church group know and everyone else, get your hands on this drug somehow. You may be able to save your life. And there are 3 different companies pursuing anti-IL-11 therapy. That's very good news because when there's competition, the price comes down. Right now, it's very expensive to develop a new drug, and sometimes that one new drug is very expensive. You get 3 competitors, it knocks down the price. Very good news. So the big announcement is that the interleukin-11 inhibition therapy, which worked in mice 18 months later, is being studied in humans. When I saw this, it was one of those good news events. It made it a very good day to know that this drug, which could have taken years, made it into human study within a short period of time. Rapid fire progress in which they were able to take a technology. Google spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing this, but moving it into human study, a timeline that decades ago would have been impossible. So we're seeing AI-driven drug development in which they're able to use computational biology, accelerated clinical trial design to do in a couple years what used to take 15 or 20 years. And we've known about that. We talk about drugs that were in the pipeline decades ago. It takes forever to get them into human type utilization. So the next Kitty Hawk moment, next one that may change the way we view human longevity because we want it to be a lot longer. And we think we all know about telomeres, these repetitive nucleotide sequences at the end of our chromosomes, and they shorten every time the cell divides, and eventually we don't have any more telomeres, and we die. And we're doing a lot to extend our telomeres, but all we do is extend them by a trivial amount, if at all. And what they were able to do, these scientists, this is fascinating, they were able to reprogram CD4 immune cells in a way that they would latch on to antigen cells, antigen-presenting cells in the body, and do it in a way to rob these antigen-producing cells of their telomeres and deliver it systemically to cells throughout the body. This is unprecedented. It will literally give us rivers of telomeres to continually regenerate the telomere attrition that occurs with normal aging, that at one point people thought was going to be impossible to do anything about. This is a major, major advance. Our scientists have been reviewing this paper, trying to figure out all the details about it. We can have literally a telomere transfer coming into our body, continuous telomere transfers being available once it's brought up to an industrial scale. So this is one of those major events that may solve the problem of chronically shortened telomeres. So to try to explain this again in a better way, you had these T cells, they were programmed in the laboratory to be able to take these telomere-inducing DNA from the antigen-presenting cells and then put them into vesicles so that they could be spread throughout the body of older animals. And the result was the animals given these extra DNA telomere modulating proteins, they lived nearly 5 years, some of them. Typical mouse lifespan, 2 to 3 years. That equates to maybe 140 to 50 human years if this same technology works in people the way it does in these lab mice. This is absolutely tremendous. And some of the advantages of this treatment, it was effective with just a single treatment. A single treatment enabled these mice to live 5 years instead of 2 or 3 years. It didn't use cells, which we always like, because cells could potentially get into our bone marrow, create a graft versus host situation. In this case, they just used the exosomes, the vesicles from these CD4 utilized cells, and they were able then to regenerate telomeres in older animals, transplant them. And it worked at an old age. A single treatment working at an old age and doesn't use cells. This has all kind of fantastic advantages. And this was a concluding quote. And again, this is more of something for you to review. This whole presentation will be on the church website by tomorrow. And they were taking these aged mice and they adapted this way of creating CD4 T cells, these are immune cells, to bind to the antigen-presenting cells and then have them produce lots of telomere modulating proteins and transplant them into other aged mice to rejuvenate them. This is a fantastic advance. This alone could be a method to extend our life in a radical method. But just imagine if we inhibit interleukin-11 and we add all of these telomeres to our otherwise aged cells, the kind of rejuvenation that we may be able to achieve. So again, just to remind people, this was transplantable rejuvenation via rivers of telomeres, and this is potentially a program of youth. Telomere transfer into our bodies, where we no longer have to worry about the telomere attrition being a cause of death. And, well, another Kitty Hawk moment, that's what I'm saying. There's more information I'm going to present tonight, maybe than all my other presentations in any single night, because there's more new science. There's just more new science. Now, we're familiar with transcription factors. Our group is paying for a huge study in which we're testing the OSK Yamanaka factors in primates, but there's other transcription factors out there also. And this particular study, and we really looked into this deeply, we were able to identify what they were doing, which is using two transcription factors to overexpress them and then silence two others, turn them down, so we could reverse several hallmarks of cellular aging. And what we'd like to eventually do is probably add to OSK these transcription factors, the EZF3, we want to overexpress that, and we want to repress the STAT3 and the ZFX. Those are toxic types of the transcription factors. So cellular programming will involve literally mobilizing our beneficial transcription factors and suppressing the ones that are causing us to age and die. And there are 14 hallmarks of aging. I'm going to get into that in the next few minutes, but we right now, the science of life extension, the science of longevity research, they've got ways to intervene with virtually every one of these hallmarks of aging, and I'll make that more clear to you in upcoming slides. So what we're doing right now as it relates to transcription factor is figuring out ways in which we can boost the good ones and suppress the bad ones, and we have a way of doing it right now. And what that was shown in laboratory models, it reduced fibrosis. Remember, fibrosis is something we don't want. Steatosis, that's often fatty infiltration into the liver that predisposes to cirrhosis, improving glucose tolerance. All of these benefits with these types of transcription factor alterations. Remember, you want to improve the expression of the beneficial ones and then silence as much as you can the transcription factors that cause us to age and die. I'm going to take a water break and just play a very brief clip on a Fox News broadcast talking about what I'm talking about, potentially living forever.
Live forever and prosper. That's right. Took that from Spock in Star Trek. Listen, we're here to celebrate the next big thing that's going to happen to humankind, and that's Americans, right? Living longer.
I don't know how many of you get to see these. I get sent them by people every once in a while. I suspect I get sent 1/10 of 1% of what's really out there. We got the media talking about living forever, something I've been talking about my whole life, but now it's made it into the mainstream, and we're seeing more and more of these clips. I got a few more to show you before this presentation is over. But the good news is life expectancy is up, but it's only 79 years. Right now, a person born today is expected to live 79 years. I don't think anyone in this church would accept 79 measly years. It's ridiculous. We're looking at hundreds and thousands of years of lifespan potential. And, well, to make everyone feel a little bit better as it relates to this data, let's remember about 80% of the American population misbehaves badly as it relates to their health. They do almost everything they can to shorten their lifespan one way or another. I mean, fewer people smoke, now more people eat bad food. So we got fewer smoking-related deaths, more people dying from obesity and metabolic syndromes. So there's a lot that people do to only live an average of 79 years. I'd like to think everyone in this church has done something to extend their normal lifespan way more than 79 years and live long enough so we can make sure we live into that fantastic world of the future. Now, for those younger people, they may not know, in the 1960s, there was a movie that everyone watched, went to see, Fantastic Voyage, and it dealt with a very important person that needed to have major surgery in their body on a microscopic way. And the only way to do this was science fiction back then, was to shrink these humans in scuba outfits and a submarine to go into the body, into the capillaries of this very important person and cut away the toxin. Well, that was the 1960s. Then 1986, the prospect of nanotechnology transforming into reality. It was written up in a book called Engines of Creation. That resulted in an avalanche of interest in people wanting to feel like, wow, if you can perfect nanorobots, you may be able to mechanistically reverse aging. I mean, IL-11 inhibition and the transcription factors, those are chemical ways, but to actually be able to go in on a molecular basis and reverse aging, wow, that book, 1986 by Eric Drexler, ignited a firestorm of interest in the prospect of immortality. And what happened in January, Wall Street Journal reported on the world's smallest nano robot, smaller than a grain of sand. It was programmable, autonomous, and able to, well, do pretty much whatever you wanted it to, and then think on its own. It has its own brain. So what was considered total science fiction back in the 1960s, it's transformed theoretically in 1986 into partial reality, and now we're seeing that happen before our eyes. Again, this is out of that movie Fantastic Voyage. That's the little submarine running through the capillaries beds of a dying person, and then using their lasers to cut away the toxin that was killing that person. And again, this movie, it was well watched, well produced, and it was all, of course, science fiction, and we're now seeing it transform into reality. Smaller than a grain of sand. This is reported in January this year in Wall Street Journal, and it can be programmed by light impulses to autonomously go in and do what you want it to. And it moves itself around by generating a tiny electrical field so it can move itself around. So this may be the beginning of molecular medicine, microscopic medicine, being able to go and repair damage in our bodies. Because remember, these robots work 24/7. And if you make a lot of them, you will have all these robots running around your body, hopefully restoring a lot of youth to your body. And I'm going to play this end of this video clip.
We became aware of living longer and the advancements in nutrition, technology, spirituality, and medicine. The United States is on track to see its 100-year population increase by more than 400%.
Well, that's really fantastic to think of a lot more people living to be 100, and it's making the front pages of major publications. How to live to 100, I think almost everyone in this church knows what they can do to at least come close to 100 and what to do, what not to do, but it's being reported now on the front pages, front covers of popular magazines and newspapers. January Time dedicated their entire issue to the potential of age reversal. And I've been doing this long enough to tell you that when I first started talking about age reversal, probably around 2010, practical ways to maybe do it, and no one really gave it any thought. They just thought it was impossible. In reality, I've been talking about it since the 1970s, but there started to be evidence around 2010, 2014, young plasma might be a way to reverse certain aspects of aging, and we're already seeing some of those results in clinical work that I'm not going to describe tonight, but we've already described in this church. There is some evidence that we can reverse partially reverse aging with healthy young plasma. So a study that I reported on last month, just to keep everyone up to date, this study done in monkeys, and they were treating them with senescent resistant mesenchymal progenitor cells, and they were able to take these old monkeys and derive all of these types of benefits. These types of benefits using one intervention, in this case, senescent resistant mesenchymal progenitor cells. And they were able to, over half the tissues, they were able to show a reversal of age-associated gene expression. And this was published in the journal Cell, very prestigious. When you see something published in Nature or Cell, it usually means the research was thoroughly peer-reviewed, top-line scientists did it, credible institutions behind it. So we are working with these Chinese scientists attempting to get our hands on these senescent resistant progenitor cells and replicating it in mice, replicating it in primates, and then humans. As soon as we can, allow older humans to drive these types of benefits with this particular modality. Now, Yamanaka factors, I've been talking about this for a number of years. These are able to reprogram our older cells back into younger cells that can then help regenerate our tissues theoretically forever. We've got an ongoing Yamanaka factor trial in primates, and that trial is moving along. We're delivering the OSK Yamanaka factors to these primates. We're going to know the results maybe in April, and the reason we're doing it in primates, it was done in mice. The Salk Institute 2022 publication, they systemically reverse biological aging by using OSKM Yamanaka transcription factors, and then 2 years later, a publication came out that showed even better results, more systemic age reversal and extended remaining lifespan. And I've shown these slides before, but we've got some new people here and they should understand what I'm talking about. Transcription factors, the OSK, when they gave them to older mice, the human equivalent of 77 years, they were able to reprogram their cells systemically. They increased remaining lifespan, improved frailty scores, and they more than doubled how much longer the treated group was able to live compared to the untreated group. And you look at that number there, if you were in the unlucky control group and you were a mouse, you died in less than 9 weeks. But if you had these OSK Yamanaka factors put into your DNA, you get to live about 18 weeks. So this is what we want, and this is what we're hoping to see in the primates. We're spending huge amounts of money on this primate study where we're going to put OSK into their bodies. Different ways of delivering them. You can do it through a virus, you can do it through a polymer, plasmid, lipid nanoparticles, and chemical reprogramming, which is being actively pursued by a lot of people, where literally you take a pill once a week or once a month, and it would induce endogenous OSK production, so you wouldn't need to add the OSK externally. So any one of these four might be the best way to do it. But what we're doing is using a method that will either involve a lipid nanoparticle or a polymer nanoparticle. So our primate research, we expect to have some data with a DNA methylation epigenetic age clock test in April of this year. This is what we're looking forward to. The study is moving ahead at the rate we hoped it would. And please understand, primates, they live a lot longer than mice, so we don't see results as fast. But we're hoping to see robust results. And if not, we'll try it again. We're not going to give up. So we're using two different OSK addition therapies. There's the polymer nanoparticles or the lipid nanoparticles. Either one of these effectively delivers OSK into cells, does it systemically, and we're going to see which one of these works the best. We're using two different forms. It's doubling the cost for us pretty much, but we want to know which works better, the polymer or the lipid nanoparticles. And just to remind people how this works, we are delivering genes into the nuclear DNA of cells systemically. And in this case, we're taking a lipid nanoparticle of fat, and we're inserting the mRNA OSK blueprint into that fat. And that fat will easily transpose itself through the outer membrane where it gets into the cell and then releases the OSK genetic profile blueprint. And what happens when those proteins are released, the ribosomes then convert them into OSK, and that easily goes through the nuclear pores into the nucleus and binds to our DNA. This is how simple it is to induce effective gene addition therapy. What we're doing is we're adding OSK to nuclear DNA with the objective of reversing the aging process of that cell, and by doing it systemically, reversing the aging process, we hope, of the monkeys. This is our goal. And I showed these last couple of sessions, but what we're seeing with the technology we have right now is we are transfecting the cells with the OCT4 transcription factor, including the brain, and we're doing it with the SOX2 transcription factor. These colors show the amount of OSK or SOX2 that we're delivering into these animals. And this is technology that a couple decades ago would have been science fiction, and now it's routine. It's routine. And what's good is we are seeing the technology we are developing working, and most importantly, the brain. At first, there was a concern that we might regenerate everything else except the brain. that the blood-brain barrier might impede the delivery of these OSK factors. Good news is it didn't, and we think this might be an effective treatment if it works in monkeys for people with various forms of dementia. We're very excited about it. The first injection was done December 9th. We'll do the second one in March, and we hope to have epigenetic age data by April to disseminate and let people know how are these older monkeys doing who get the OSK compared to the control group of older monkeys who are not getting it. And Elon Musk, well, he's finally talking a little bit about age reversal. This is the World Economic Forum. He's there with another billionaire, and they're talking about something of importance to all of us, and that is aging. I'm going to play a very brief clip.
Can you and I reverse aging in this new history, or are we going to see it?
You know, I haven't put much time into the aging stuff. I do think it is a very solvable problem. I think we will figure out ways to extend life and maybe even reverse aging. I think that's highly likely.
I'm looking forward to that.
You've got two billionaires right there. One of them, the richest man in the world, self-made billionaire, and he's done the impossible over and over again. He thinks aging is a solvable problem with barely looking at it. He is working on a brain-cloud interface, which is another way of us achieving indefinitely extended existence as it relates to transhumanism. So the 14 hallmarks of aging, I thought this was a beautiful graphic, except you really can't see what it is, so I broke it down. And every one of these hallmarks of aging, or let's call them degenerative mechanisms of aging, we can deal with a lot of this already with the off-label medications, lifestyles, nutrients. We can at least circumvent some of these 14 hallmarks of aging. I had to put it on 2 pages. And you see a lot of what's up there. Chronic inflammation, certainly there's a lot we can do about that. We can induce autophagy in a number of different ways. So we can already deal with what we already know are underlying causal factors of aging. But here's what happened in 2024, and we analyzed this data. They used an AI to look at the various off-label drugs that many of us are already taking, such as metformin and rapamycin, and then other ones that are less popular. But if, like, you have a bone density issue, the bisphosphonate drugs apparently has anti-aging properties beyond just building strong bone. GLP-1 inhibitors, the agonists that is, well, they are good for weight loss, but they also have other anti-aging benefits. So what they did is they looked at all of these repurposed drugs, and they looked at how many different hallmarks of aging did each drug impact. And they looked upon it with preclinical work, which could mean just petri dish work or animal research, and they were able to show health spans and lifespans were prolonged in response to already available prescription drugs that are being used increasingly by a number of enlightened individuals to slow down their aging. So we can see that they're addressing hallmarks of aging, and they work even better in people, at least with the data they analyzed. And every one of these numbers, a 3 means they are effectively and beneficially circumventing 3 of the hallmarks of aging, and they affect different hallmarks of aging. And so we can see in people, they improve health span and lifespan. It kind of validates what a lot of us have been doing with metformin and other medications, i.e. they're working and they know specifically how they're working. And then they graded them. And the SGLT2 inhibitors, that was at the top, but actually the bisphosphonates also showed tremendous benefits. You see metformin up there, and they were able to show that these drugs are effectively interfering with the degenerative changes that cause biological aging. This is tremendous to have this kind of chart to kind of know what we're doing. And it shouldn't surprise you. Metformin, we've been talking about that since 1995. And then the acronyms there, ARB, that's an angiotensin receptor blocker, like losartan, telmisartan. That's an antihypertensive drug. And while lowering blood pressure is good, these drugs have other mechanisms that have benefits. When people with high blood pressure tell me, I don't want to take a drug, I have to tell them, not only does that drug lower your blood pressure and reduce your stroke risk, it also has other anti-aging properties, aspirin, beta blockers. These are showing significant benefits against mortality beyond their approved use. And for ones like metformin and the angiotensin receptor blockers or angiotensin enzyme inhibitors, they feel that there are specific causal effects, meaning specific mechanisms that these drugs have to delay biological aging. So people have been holding back getting these kind of drugs. Think about using them, because what the study found is if you put these together, which makes sense because they don't all work the same way, you're going to get a much better effect than just taking one alone. If you're only taking metformin, that's good, but you add an angiotensin receptor blocker, you add aspirin, you add a beta blocker, you add a bisphosphonate, you add an SGLT2 inhibitor, which I'm going to talk about, you may be deriving incredible benefits. So personalized intervention, not everyone would take all these drugs. For some of you, they may be contraindicated, but the idea is the data, the big data analysis through AI is revealing what we assumed would be working. It actually is working. And as I always do, almost every service, I bring out a new study on metformin. This one showed reducing cardiovascular disease risk 28% in this brand new study, January 2026 study. Now, we've got hundreds of other studies that demonstrate this, but they keep testing metformin. And what it does is it reduces your risk of heart failure, ischemic heart disease, peripheral artery disease, stroke. And then you combine metformin with testosterone especially, and heart failure improves that problem. So we've got the most common causes of death out there: cardiovascular diseases, stroke, heart attack, peripheral diseases. One drug that is not being used enough, one drug used off-label, could mean the difference between how long you get to live. So we've got the data continuing to be consistent that the off-label drugs that we recommend are working probably better than what we originally anticipated. The GLP-1 agonists, these enable people to lose a lot of weight. Yes, some people have side effects. Forget about side effects as it relates to those people. They simply can't take the drug. But if you benefit from it, you not only lose weight, you protect yourself against a host of other metabolic disorders, diabetes, liver dysfunction, all kinds of problems that occur in response to growing older. These drugs have beneficial effects. I first showed this, by the way, back in 2023, way before Mounjaro and Ozempic and Wegovy were popular. We knew these drugs had peripheral benefits, and we hope we save some lives by letting people know. So what I want to conclude with is a drug class that we introduced a couple years ago at this church, SGLT2 inhibiting drugs. These are used by type 2 diabetes. They work by a very unique way, and that stands for sodium glucose cotransporter 2. And what these drugs do is they lower glucose levels, which is a big benefit. That also usually lowers A1C and insulin. You don't want to have high fasting insulin. But I just learned yesterday, talking to somebody, these SGLT2 inhibitors have anti-cancer effects beyond their ability to lower glucose and insulin, which is fantastic. But here's where we are as it relates to optimal glucose levels. 1980s, it's kind of scary. If you went to a doctor's office and your fasting glucose was 135, he'd say, well, you're normal. You don't need any intervention. You're okay. In reality, you were a type 2 diabetic at 135. So the newer blood test reference ranges, they want you under 99 as it relates to fasting glucose. But the reality, based on published research, is you really want to be around 84, 83, and that would then reduce your cardiovascular disease risk more than having these higher levels. And it's not easy to lower glucose as we grow older. We lose insulin sensitivity. Glucose normally increases. And that's why some of the data I presented before, where you have improved insulin sensitivity, has a lot of basic good ways of achieving something. Now, I was challenged to get my glucose down, but I got on the SGLT2 inhibitors, and I got some benefits from it. So I want to explain, though, how this works. It's very interesting. Our kidneys, they do a lot more than what people think. But the glucose, it goes in to our kidneys, and our kidneys literally remove it from our blood. And then our kidneys put it back in. And that's a survival mechanism because, well, when we were in primitive times, we had to keep our glucose and sodium pretty high because we didn't know where our next meal was coming from. So normally our kidneys will take glucose out, put it right back in, and if we've got too much glucose, we want that glucose, frankly, to go down the toilet. So what the SGLT2 inhibitors do is they block the reabsorption of the glucose and sodium back into your bloodstream and then turn it into a urinary excretion. So you're able to excrete out excess salt and sugar in response to this one class of drugs. And if you realize how high some glucose levels are in type 2 diabetics, if you take an SGLT2 inhibitor and you're a diabetic, you might be able to excrete 80 to 120 grams of glucose in your urine every single day. I mean, that's huge. So people are having glucose challenging issues. And to me, if your glucose is up over 90, you might want to try to push it down a little bit with this class of drugs, because what they do is they reduce the risk of kidney failure. They're good for the kidneys. You might think because they work in the kidneys is their toxicity. No, these are now being prescribed in people with chronic kidney disease to improve their filtration rates, improve their creatinine and cystatin levels. So they also reduce cardiovascular disease risk in a major, major way. There's not too many other drugs out there that if you can compare them to people who take them to not as to what they do, this one reduces all-cause mortality, 56%. Huge benefits to this class of drug. There's a lot of them out there now, and because of that, the prices are coming down. If you get a good doctor who will write your prescription, maybe your insurance will cover it. This is one of those drugs that was shown to have multifaceted anti-aging properties in that chart that I showed you. And cancer, yeah, I think we should all be afraid of that. The treatments alone are rather nasty. 65% reduction in cancer risk in response to SGLT2 inhibiting drugs. So this is a repurposed drug. It went to the very top of the chart of the repurposed drugs as far as the number of hallmarks of aging that it was able to attack. So as I try to do with every service, reinforce healthier behaviors, because against me is the industrial food complex. We've got so many people who want you to die sooner by you misbehaving and using their products. We have to be the ones to tell you about what we can do. Preventing cancer. This is brand new data that came out just a couple weeks ago. And well, we all know if you don't smoke, that's good. But these charts that I'm showing you are the cancer risks associated with misbehaving. And we all do it to some extent. I don't want to criticize anybody, but we can see various ways that we can reduce our cancer risk. More physical activity, better diet, avoiding tobacco and alcohol, and certainly pesticides, toxins, and whatever this data reveals, at least gives us an idea of what we should not be doing, what we can do to at least reduce our cancer risk in a rather major way. And it goes beyond just not smoking. There are other factors involved. So the great news is the artificial intelligence revolution, it's enabling scientists to do the impossible. This particular study identified 500 interventions to slow biological aging. And they got this data by analyzing 43,000 experimental studies using AI. Humans can't do that. They can't stay up nonstop for a year to analyze all this. The AI works around the clock, and it pulled out these interventions that can potentially reverse or slow down our aging process. It's going to give us a lot more as we move ahead. And, well, what do we need to do to live longer? Well, nutrition, sleep, exercise. Important, not paid attention to enough sometimes by people who really want to live longer, but they ignore this. And just a little bit more sleep, a little bit more exercise, well, you get to live longer. And in this case, if you're able to do more sleep, more exercise, I'm not talking about real aggressive exercise either, just a little bit more than what you're doing, and healthy eating, you get 4 additional years of health span. This is great. And again, small changes, and the more of the change you make, the better the result you get. More sleep, more exercise, more physical activity, and an optimal diet, over 9 additional years of lifespan, according to this AI model. And it pretty much corroborates what we already know. And that is, if you're going to sit around and not move at all, your risk of death, 300% higher. And if you think, well, I'm just going to walk around a little bit, this is good enough, you're still 83% higher. Get over 10 or 15 minutes of just modest high interval training or just walking, you decrease your risk of dying 10% and 20%. So you're getting these 9-year decreased risk of dying in response to what we all know we should be doing. In this particular analysis, it showed that people getting a little bit more exercise, they had an 80% lower mortality rate. huge, huge reductions in cardiovascular disease rate. So there's different ways of doing this. You all have to figure out what can you do to not sit around all day. The dangers of sitting are huge. They're one of the bigger dangers out there that people are engaging in today. And we presented data like this a couple years ago. This was a different study showing that if you just walk more every day, get 15 minutes or more of good walking in, you add about 5 years to your lifespan. So it's not like you have to spend hours at the gym every single day. It's good for you to do that, but if you can't do that, a little bit more physical activity, it yields a lot. And of course, we know what healthy food is, and we know what dangerous food is. I think everyone in this church does know, but again, I'm trying to reinforce what we should be doing. It's what we feed you there. We feed you good, healthy food, and we stay right away from the kind of foods that unfortunately are being promoted by the industrial food complex. So the House of Optimal Health, level 1 is what we can do today to improve our odds of living a lot longer. And before you try to engage in an experimental intervention, consider optimizing that level 1. Because if you do that, it gives you an opportunity to be alive when the interleukin-11 inhibitor becomes available, when the CD4 telomere transfer technology becomes available, when gene therapy becomes routine. You want to be alive. And in order to be alive, you've got to adhere to level 1. Because if you don't have a strong health foundation, you will crumble. And all those benefits on level 2, they're not going to be available to you because you're going to prematurely die or prematurely degenerate to a point where it may be too late to resuscitate you. Resuscitate meaning bring you back into a youthful state as opposed to where you are now. So again, failure to adhere to level 1, it just simply means you're going to prematurely die. Unfortunately, I know hundreds of people who would not give up their sugar, would not give up their bad habits. They said, I'll do everything else, but I'm not going to do this or that. And they wind up, unfortunately, suffering premature illness, premature death. We want to put an end to that. And I like to conclude every talk with someone who died perhaps needlessly. He's only 65 years old, worth $4.8 billion. He died purportedly of a cardiovascular-related event, and that's pathetic for a wealthy person to not having their blood checked every couple months, intervening. He also, though, may have had an addiction problem. We don't know that yet, but the cardiovascular death may have been brought on by some opioid and ketamine overdose. But nonetheless, people who own a football team, for a lot of people who are into football, that would be the greatest event in their life, to actually own a football team. They do it for free. He owned one, and unfortunately at age 65, with all that money, he died. I'm not aware of him putting any money into aging research, and that's my critique of some of these billionaires. They don't fund aging research. More and more of them are, by the way, but if they're not doing it, their failure to support a scientist means they may have missed out on an opportunity to live longer, along with the rest of humanity. So again, what I've presented during this, 45 to 50 minutes, it's maybe more than I've ever done in a single presentation. And I will present updates to what I presented tonight in future church services, because so much of this data is new that our scientific people are still trying to figure out how can we accelerate this so that we can gain access to these types of interventions sooner. We want healthy transcription factors in our body, and we want to silence the dangerous ones, and we want to be able to use these repurposed drugs liberally. We want to have access to them at an affordable price, and thank goodness most of them are available at affordable prices. And we now have the opportunity of thinking at some point medicine may be going nano, with robots circulating throughout our body, repairing all of the damage. Elon Musk talking about aging being solvable, being perhaps reversible. And well, what you can do today, I presented a lot already about what you can do today. Try to do as much as you can, because that buys you a lot of extra years. Not just a few, a lot of extra years. So I want to thank everyone for attending, and I'm always available to answer questions both here and after the service.